This recording was produced by Oregon Trail Baptist Church. If you'd like to get more recordings, or to leave your feedback, please visit us at www.otbchurch.com or write us at P.O. Box 298, Guernsey, Wyoming 82214. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope that today's recording will not just challenge your thinking, but will transform your life.
All right, let's get started this morning. We are on the Ten Commandments, so let's get started with Exodus 20.
Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and hallowed it. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. Exodus 20 verses 3 through 17.
So this week we're on number 8. Thou shalt not steal. Very simple. In Hebrew it's only 2 words, steal not. Pretty simple. I put there a classic image from Norman Rockwell. You're smiling, Laquita. You've seen that one before, haven't you? This is a good picture of, how do I say this? Most of us will not picture ourselves as thieves. We haven't been caught for shoplifting. We haven't been involved in a bank robbery. But this picture has, in my mind, your classic kind of vintage now, but the butcher putting his finger on the scale, holding it down while the lady buying it is kind of putting her finger, both thinking that they are getting the better end of the deal. And with paintings, it's kind of fun because people interpret it all sorts of different ways. And so you have both of them being crooked in some interpretations. But sometimes somebody said, well, actually it's the butcher who's crooked, and she's just trying to even the scale because he knows he's crooked. And like, okay, whatever. However you want to interpret that, we all get it. What's that? Yeah, or the butcher knows that she's always in there playing with the scale. So anyway, the command to not steal, we often don't think of ourselves as thieves. But as we go through this, you'll find that there's times we probably are guilty of this ourselves. So, quote, as we introduce this topic, in an agrarian society, which means they're living off the land, even the theft of basic household items or livestock could rupture the fabric of family and community life, just as could murder and adultery. We've covered those already, but if you think about it, if you're living off the land, if you're living day to day, stealing of the necessities of someone's life, you're taking away their livelihood, and it's going to create rifts in the family. As the family works the farm together or the land together, it will create problems. I was reading one story this week that it very much only really happens in Western culture, but there was a letter written to a thief, and the thief had stole a bunch of items out of this person's garage. But the letter said, look, we don't even know what you stole, and we can't claim it as a tax deduction, and we can't get our insurance check unless we have an itemized list. We don't need the things back. Could you just send us an itemized list of what you stole and the approximate value? So something like that only happens in America, where we have so much stuff that we don't even know what we have, and we can go a long time without even realizing it's gone. But anyway, let's jump in here a little bit. So the word for steal there in the Hebrew, as it gets translated in different sections in the Bible, it's very consistent in how it's translated. We see steal, stealing, stolen, steal away. Very similar, not a lot of differences. I mean, same but general concept. So basically the verb here, to steal, is to take that which belongs to another without his consent or knowledge. Okay, that is helpful. Consent and knowledge. I'll use an illustration here. Our neighbor across the alley, Bob Elmore, some of you know him, before he moved to Arizona, he said, look, if you never need any tools, ever need anything, feel free to grab it and borrow it out of my garage. So if I borrowed something out of his garage, would that be stealing? Why? Yep. Now, he didn't know the specific item or place, but he gave me, license to do so, right? Now, I still, every time I went to take something, I would knock on the door to ask first. Why would I do that? I had blanket permission. Honesty. Now, if I was in a pickle and I needed a jack or something and nobody answered the door, I would take it, I would use it, I would return it, and then I'd still tell him about it next time I saw him. Okay? The reason for that is trust. To keep honesty, to keep trust with that person. Stealing from a person violates that trust. And that's something that is very, very important. And that's why, sure, he may not acknowledge that I took it, but he's given me consent. But I think there's a value in always trying to come back to that person with knowledge. And that coming back might be as simple as when you take something, leave a note if you can't, put a note there, took it on this date, whatever. It's honoring that this stuff belongs to them, which also brings into another element. This here assumes private property. If the community owns everything, you cannot steal. If we live communally and everything is just shared by everybody, if I came to your house and took your food out of your cupboard, I'm not stealing, because it's just the community's. And so there's an assumption here within the Old Testament that private property is part of life, part of how a good society will work. Now, you can't jump to that conclusion and go all the way to private property, therefore everything I have is mine and I shouldn't use it, and it's mine, I've earned it, stay away, don't touch it. When you get to that attitude, what does the Old Testament say about that? Well, it treats it so strongly that in Ezekiel it lumps in the fact that they didn't care for the poor with the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah, but it's greed, it's selfishness, and so there's a lot to say in the Old Testament about being generous. But we could all stand here and complain about the tax system or the government or big businesses who are very generous with other people's money. That's why it irks us when we see municipal funds used inappropriately or municipal workers not doing their job, and we see it happen. That bothers us because we know we're all paying taxes for that. We're all paying into that, and they're robbing all of us of not doing what they're supposed to do. So the fact that you can steal means that private property is a reality. Now, again, that doesn't mean we should be greedy. It doesn't mean we should hoard our things, but it's private property is assumed within the Old Testament. Douglas Stewart in American Commentary says this: stealing threatens the social order and causes pain to others by undermining the ability to possess with sure access things that are useful and needful. This, what he's saying here, seen in action specifically in Africa. Here in America, if someone came out and stole your property, stole your lawnmower from your property, it was sitting there, your police would probably come, they'd do a report, they might look for it, and hopefully you'd find it. But if the person was caught, there would be justice. However, in a lot of African countries, that's not the case. There is a mindset, and I don't know if you remember Glenn and Sarah Swanson. Glenn was talking to me about some of this that he encountered over there. There's a mindset that since you are richer than me, since you have something I don't have, you owe it to me to let me have it. So when we were in Uganda and the generator, which we used every night, was stolen, it didn't matter that they came into the property, broke the lock. It didn't matter they cut through the fence. It didn't matter that they drug it through the field. We couldn't pursue that track because it led to the relative's house of the, basically, it'd be like the equivalent of like the city mayor or you couldn't do that because, well, he probably needed it more than you. Well, it doesn't matter. He didn't pay for it. He damaged property to get it. So when a society is structured and it allows for stealing, it allows for that without much or many consequences, good morning, it damages all of society. How many of you put fences with barbed wire around your homes? How many of us put walls around our cities? It was the envisioning of our founding fathers, good morning, to create a civilization or create a society that didn't need walled cities. Now, that can only happen if there's rule of law and enforcement. And quite frankly, today, most of us live fairly comfortably. Yes, there's still thieves, but most of us live fairly comfortably with the fact that my stuff in my house is fairly safe. I know it's not perfectly safe, but it's not necessarily rampant. So that actually helps an economy grow, because think of all the money that gets wasted in African countries and other countries where the law is not administered. You then now have to not take the law in your own hands. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. You have to protect yourself. So you have to build fences. You have to build barriers. You have to put in places security. You have to do things where before that was not necessary. So anyway, there is the whole concept of stealing from one person to another creates more and more barriers and complications in life. It creates expenses. The same thing happens with computers. Okay, people will ask me, why does my computer, it's only 5 years old, why does it get so much slower? Well, it's not the hardware. I mean, the hardware does degrade, but it's the fact that the older that computer gets, the more and more viruses and different things trying to get your information are out there, so you have to build a bigger and bigger protection against them. And it takes more and more of a load on the machine, so as technology progresses, so are the viruses and all the phishing and all the different things where they're trying to get your info, which drives the whole market forward. If it wasn't for that, our computers would be much quicker. They would work much better, but there's constantly updates coming out to fix problems because people are trying to steal private or personal information. Page 3, top of your handout, we'll go through some of the categories of objects considered stolen in Scripture. And this is not an exhaustive list, but just a few of them here. One was images or idols. In Genesis 31, it says, "And Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel," which was his wife, "had stolen the images that were her father's. And now, though thou wouldest needs be gone, because thou stole," this is Laban talking to Jacob here, "thou wouldest be gone, because thou sore longest after thy father's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods?" So Jacob gets accused of stealing them. In verse 32, he says, "With whomsoever thou findest thy gods, let him not live. Therefore, our brethren, discern thou what is thine with me, and take it for thee. For Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them." So we see that in a couple things. One, he's assuming it was a male who had taken it. Also, Rachel was his favorite wife. And if you remember the story, she gets out of it because she's sitting on all the idols on the camel or donkey. She's sitting on them, all of them. And she says to her father, "The custom of women is upon me. I can't, don't make me rise right now." And so he doesn't, and she hides them all there. But do you ever wonder if Jacob ever found the idols later? I mean, the Bible doesn't tell us, but do you ever wonder? But he's got 2 wives here, and you're talking an entourage of people. You know, I don't know. I don't know. It's just speculation. Who knows? So here, their very images or idols are being stolen. Money is stolen at various points. Genesis 44. "And when they were gone out of the city, and not yet far off, Joseph said unto his steward, follow after the men. And when thou dost overtake them, saying to them, Wherefore have ye rewarded evil for good? Behold the money which we found in our sacks." Okay, so what's going on in this story, because I've skipped some verses, they didn't actually steal the money, but they're being accused of it. So what had happened was they left, Joseph had instructed his servants to put the money back in their sacks. They get part way home to Canaan, and they realize, we still have our money and we have the food. So when they went back the second time, they brought the money for the first, and they brought more money for paying more. They told them, "Hey, you put our money back last time," and so then that's what's happening here. But there's the accusation, at least here, of stealing money. Also in Exodus 22, we read, "If a man shall deliver unto his neighbor money or stuff to keep, and it be stolen out of the man's house, if the thief be found, let him pay double. If the thief not be found, then the master of the house shall be brought unto the judges to see whether he have put his hand unto his neighbor's goods." So there, it's dealing more than just the theft of money, but the judges will determine, hey, while you were supposed to hold something for your neighbor, did you kind of dip your fingers in the bag a little and take some for yourself? Also here, there's the aspect of stealing in that you take booty or you take something that belongs to God. This happens in the story of Achan in this book of Joshua. In Joshua 7, it says, Israel hath sinned, and then they have transgressed my covenant which I commanded them. For they have taken of the accursed thing, and have also stolen and disassembled also, and they have put it even among their own stuff. You may remember this story. So Achan, they're instructed when they conquered Jericho, we're going to go in, we're going to plunder the city after we conquer it, but all of the plunder of Jericho was to go for what purpose? It was devoted to God. So all the gold and goods of the city were essentially going to be used in the tabernacle or temple. They were going to be set aside for God's use. There was nothing of the city that they were to take for themselves. Very much the first fruits, the land, the first conquering, the first city down, this was set apart for God. And Achan goes in. He's plundering, he's going through the city, conquering it. He takes with him some gold. He takes with him some garments. He hides them in his house, which I could probably hide something in our... Well, I have hid things in our house that my wife has not found. But try to hide something in a tent. Just think about that. He hid it in the ground. How do you dig a hole in a tent without your family knowing about it? That's true, but it's very hard to hide things. Freshly dug up dirt is pretty obvious. So his family knew about it, which is probably why partially they were involved as well in the judgment for it. But here in Joshua 7, it says he stole from the Lord. Because he has also stolen and puts it among... This is the stuff that was dedicated to the Lord, and it used the term that he stole it. Kind of an audacious thing. If you think about stealing from a bank, you know the law enforcement's probably going to be coming after you. You think about stealing from certain entities, you know that they're going to pursue you. What about when you steal from God? Yeah, he doesn't have to pursue. And our sin does bring its own consequences, but that's just a fearful thought. Also food and water. In Proverbs 6, men do not despise a thief if he steal to satisfy his soul when he's hungry. Also in Proverbs 9, there's a passage here, stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. So you can even steal food and water. I find a little irony here in that I don't think of stealing water. I mean, water has always been a precious commodity. Don't get me wrong. And in certain places where it's very arid and dry, you don't necessarily think of stealing water. In fact, when people first started bottling water, it's like, you're never going to be able to sell water in bottles. Come on. And yet, that's a massive industry now. And so you can probably start bottling water out of your tap and sell it and pay your mortgage off. I'm not recommending you do that. I'm sure there's some rules and regulations, but anyway. All right, also here, moving beyond inanimate objects, you have animals being stolen. Exodus 22 talks about that. In Genesis 30, that's the subject of a dispute between Jacob and Laban, is animals being stolen. Now, why would that be so significant in the Old Testament culture? But it was part of their livelihood. It's like stealing cattle from a rancher. A rancher may not have a lot of money in his checkbook all the time, but his money's wrapped up in things like his livestock. And you're taking of his very livelihood. This isn't the same as taking a pet. This isn't the same as taking just an animal that's a pet or just something you keep around for fun. This is taking of someone's very livelihood. Also here, in the third one here, is people. Now, the term we would use for that today would be, what's that? Kidnapping, okay? But you can steal people, and this received the harshest of punishments in the Old Testament. Of all stealing, this had the most harsh punishments. Exodus 21:16, and he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. Deuteronomy 24. If a man be found stealing any of his children, or any of his brethren, because of the children of Israel, and maketh merchandise of him, or selleth him, then that thief shall die, and thou shalt put evil away from among you. Genesis 40, verse 15. For indeed I, Joseph, he's referring to himself, was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me in a dungeon. So, we have kidnapping in Scripture. Kidnapping was always wrong. It was always forbidden. Slavery that involved that was always condemned in the Old Testament. You also have something else here that's a bit interesting. You have moral or spiritual realities getting stolen. We'll get to some of these later, actually, today, but 2 Samuel 15, and on this matter did Absalom to all Israel that came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Now think of that phrase, stole the hearts. What is that referring to? You may remember in this story, this is towards the end of David's life. Absalom has become disgruntled with his father. Absalom is on the road of rebellion against his father. Absalom is now, what he's doing is he's setting himself up as a judge. He's setting himself, and he's taking the hearts of the people away from King David. And he stole their hearts. Now, that's an odd way to think of it. But what is happening here? What is wrong with stealing someone's heart?
Well, it's kind of the same way. Another man stealing a husband's wife's heart.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that would be.
Breaking that trust.
Who did the heart of the people of Israel belong to? First and foremost to God, and secondly was to the king that God had appointed. In contrast, David in his life, in his time when he was not king, but on the road to be king, when his men said, kill Saul, take him out, go for it, this is your opportunity, what would he do? He said, no, this is the Lord's anointed, I won't put forth my hand against him. I'm not going to do that. So, interesting one here. I'll actually come back to that in the sermon this morning. Jeremiah 23:30, here's another interesting one. It says, therefore, behold, I am against the prophets, saith the Lord, that steal my words, every one from his neighbor. What he's talking about is the prophets were saying, one prophet would receive a word from the Lord, something for the people, and then the next prophet would say, yeah, the Lord spoke that to me, and say it, and then they kept passing this around, and they all said that we're saying the same thing, but God hadn't spoken to them. Does that happen today? Okay, yes, it happens. Yeah, there's the realm of but plagiarism is a huge issue. Whether someone says, God spoke to me this or that, and someone else says, God said the same thing to me, it's like, wait, are you just copying each other? And don't get me wrong, God can speak. You may wonder why there's footnotes all the time in my handouts. It's because I don't want to plagiarize. I don't want to take credit where credit's not due. Does that make sense? If I read something and it's a helpful, good idea, or somebody says something better than I can say, I realize most of you never read the footnotes and never care. That's fine. But at least in something I've printed and handed to you, you know this is not my original thoughts. It's not always my original work. What is it? It's someone else's work, someone else's thought, someone else's digging, and if you want to get more, you can go to the footnotes. That's fine. So, again, I am not offended if you never look at the footnotes. That's fine. But if anything, it's on my conscience that I haven't stolen from others in teaching and delivering to you.
Whatever denomination you can say that, you have so-called preachers that are teaching things that didn't say.
Yeah. Didn't God say, "You shall not add unto my word which I have commanded you, neither shall you diminish aught from it"? And yeah. So, to do a little contrast before we move on here into how this gets developed within the Old Testament, the ancient Near East, the other cultures around Israel at this time, they also had laws against stealing. They also had many laws against, taking another person's property or kidnapping and that. However, they were much more severe in punishment. In some of the Assyrian or Hammurabi's code and different Hittite law codes, some of it was up to, if you stole something, you had to repay 30 times, or death or some other things. Now, they were very serious about this. So there's a little bit of a contrast there between God's people and the nations around them. Page 6 in your handout, we'll start working through the Old Testament development. Any comments or questions before we get there? All right. This first one is kind of odd, it seems. Leviticus 19. I have it under a heading here, "Stealing profaneth the name of God." It says, "Ye shall not steal, neither deal falsely, neither lie one to another. And ye shall not swear by my name falsely, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. Thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor, neither rob him of the wages, that his hire shall not abide with thee all night until morning." Now when I read that, normally I'm thinking that when it says thou shalt not profane the name of thy God, I'm connecting that in my mind with the swearing falsely. However, in the International Bible Encyclopedia, he says the general prohibition against stealing also occurs in this passage where it is grounded in the name and hence the nature of God. You shall not steal and so profane the name of the Lord your God. So he's connecting it, and others have connected it with the whole concept of dealing falsely. And so it made me stop and think about this. Look at the first verse again. You shall not steal, neither deal falsely, neither lie one to another. So you're not stealing, dealing falsely, you're deceit here. And you shall not swear by my name falsely. People who lie and cheat and steal are often the very first ones to swear. It's interesting that, they will swear something to be true. Why do they have to take an oath? Because what? So people believe them. It's interesting, the Essenes who lived in the time of Christ, they forbid all oath-taking, and their thought process on this was, you shouldn't need to take an oath at all. And this reverberates in the book of James, because when you say something, it should be good. You shouldn't need to swear. So there is maybe some more unpacking that happens within this verse and how these things are connected together. And truly, when you're willing to swear, when you're willing to steal, when you're willing to lie, when you're willing to deal falsely, and you're God's people, you are profaning his name. And remember when we talked about taking the name of the Lord in vain several lessons ago, was that limited to what we say? Was taking the name of the Lord in vain limited to things we say? No. The literal command there, the word for take, is the word also for carry. And so how you and I live our lives, how we carry ourselves, how we conduct ourselves, if it's not consistent with God's character and what God has requested and required, if it's not consistent of that, and yet with our lips we are claiming to be God's children, we're claiming to be saved by his grace, if there's an inconsistency, what's happening? We're bringing reproach on the name of the Lord. We're dishonoring him. We're displeasing him. And so we're dragging his name in the mud. So stealing gets connected in with profaning the name of the Lord. And sadly, Christians do this as well. One of the stories or illustrations I read this week was a Christian composer who visited a church he had not been to before, and they were singing one of his choir arrangements that he had done. Sadly, he found out the only legit copy was the organist's copy, and they had scanned the whole copy for the rest of the choir, which was illegal. So here you have him who spends his time, energies, and efforts to produce Christian music, and that's how he makes his living, and they're robbing from him. Zondervan estimates that for every one copy of music that they sell, they estimate 10 to 15 copies are made. They have no proof always of that, but the copying of music and not paying for that. So number 2 here, diverse weights were forbidden. All right. Now this is not saying if you've been to the post office, they don't use these scales anymore. But you remember the old weight set they had at the post office, and they still have them. They're under the desk and they're in these boxes. And I can tell you the ones at our post office probably haven't been dusted since I left there because they don't get used. They're stuffed in the back. But if they get a new scale or something, or they want to test something, they'll put those weights on. And there might be a 1 ounce and a 10 ounce, and there might be different size weights. Is that what the Bible's condemning? No. So what's it actually condemning? Because it says here, I'll read a few verses. You shall do no unrighteousness in judgment, in the meat yard, in measure, or in measurement. Just balances, just weights, a just ephod, a just hin shall ye have. I am the Lord thy God, which have brought you out of the land of Egypt. In Deuteronomy it says, thou shalt not have in thy bag diverse weights, a great and a small. But thou shalt have a perfect and just weight, a perfect and just measure shalt thou have, that thy days may be lengthened in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. What's the point of not having different size weights? Okay, but how is that being honest by having the same weight? Okay, the standard's the same. So what they would do is you would have one set of weights that were your buying set. That way you're cheating the guy a little bit. And one set of weights that were your selling sets. That way you're still cheating him. So one weighs a little more than the other, and you know it, but they don't know it. So you're switching out weights and they know it, and you're cheating the system. Meat markets have done this for years, where if you go weigh your meat, they may say it's a third of the pound, and you're getting there going, this is just a little over a quarter of a pound. How did you get a third of a pound on this, And there's all sorts of tricks to that, whether they're soaking it in water before they weigh it or things like that. It's like the fisherman who fills the fish up with water when he weighs it, just so I could say, but you get the idea. You're looking at me like that's funny. My dad used to do that as a joke. He's like, let's see how big we can get this fish. We were not much to tell fish stories, but anyway, that he would do that, and it was kind of funny. But that's what's going on here. You're dealing with the market. This goes back to Norman Rockwell's picture of the pushing up and down on the scale. Also here, allowing your livestock to graze in another's field was forbidden. That's stealing from them. Now, how is that stealing? It's not your hay. You
didn't put the money in to buy that seed.
Exactly. And if your livestock now eat their field, then what are their livestock going to eat? Yeah. So there's a prohibition there against allowing your. And here it uses the term in Exodus 22, if a man cause a field or vineyard to be eaten. So there's a deliberacy here in his actions. He's allowing something to happen, or he's causing it to happen, whether through letting down a fence or letting him in a gate or putting him there, whatever. Exodus 22, number 4 here, refusing to return an item to its rightful owner was forbidden. Kind of a long passage here about someone who's borrowing other people's stuff. But if I let you borrow something that I possess and then you refuse to give it back, that is no longer borrowing, that's stealing. You have stolen, you have taken something and not returned it. And so there were consequences and specific mention of that. Number 5 here, moving of property lines was forbidden. Again, very much an agrarian culture, off the land. You start moving property lines, you start moving boundaries, what are you doing? What's that? You're stealing their land. You're giving yourself an advantage over them. Retribution in the Old Testament was based off of circumstances. There were different levels of how stealing or theft was dealt with. Normally, you could say from Exodus 22, which is kind of a key passage on this, normally if I stole something from you and I got caught, I would have to pay double back. So think of it this way. If I am a thief, I'm stealing from you, I'm taking from your livelihood, I'm taking from your quality of life, I'm taking from that which God has given you because I deem what God has given me is not enough. I'm taking from you to looking to advantage myself at your disadvantage. And the retribution for that is now, instead of me becoming the advantaged one, the person who has been offended now gets double back. So if I lost 1 sheep, it was stolen from me, and the thief gets caught, he pays me 2 sheep. There was some exceptions to this, though. If an animal was stolen, then sold, restitution was 5 times the amount taken. Why do you think that is? Why do you think if they get caught selling it? Okay, they're making money. There's not a clear-cut, Scripture doesn't say this is why on this one. They're making money, but some commentators think this was part of an indication or sign you might be a repeated thief.
Well, if you're willing to go to that extreme, then, it shows some disregard for your neighbor.
Oh, yeah, tremendous disregard.
You're not using it for your own good or your own welfare. You're just, I just want the money.
I'm going to say this, don't take this wrong. From a thief's perspective, it makes sense to sell it and sell it quick.
Well, yeah.
Why? It's not in your possession. And once it goes from one owner to another or travels around the country, it's really hard to track down. Yeah, exactly. It's hard to track down, it's hard to pull up, it's hard to catch you. Money becomes more liquid and less identifiable. You know, you tend to recognize your own cattle, you tend to recognize your own, even with or without branding, you tend to know some of those marks and be able to know what's yours and what's not. And money, well, that changes hands so much. So there's an element here where that's a possibility of why it was so much more when you steal something and then sell it. If you get caught, the punishment was 5 times. Also, if restitution could not be made, the thief would have to work off the debt. He literally became a slave of sorts. Now, this is not condoning slavery of, putting someone into bondage and using them as free labor for your life. That's not what it's saying. But honestly, this person has defrauded you. They've stolen from you. You have every right to have to pay that back to you. And so, again, this is not our culture. We cannot force Old Testament law onto our culture today. We live under a different set of rules, and we should honor the rules which our government has set up. But this is how retribution was paid back then. I think I'll stop there for today, and we will pick up with number 7 at the bottom of page 9 next week. Any comments or questions before we... Let me summarize quickly, though. Stealing, one, you assume God has not given you what you need. Two, you're taking something from others to disadvantage them and advantage yourself. And third, you're breaking trust. The items stolen can be returned, but the trust is another issue. So we'll close in prayer, and then we'll come back in about 15 minutes for our service. Lord, we thank you for your word and how even the simple command not to steal can be so foundational to having a good society and living in a way that pleases and honors you. Lord, I ask that you would help us to see the ways in which we might be guilty of stealing in our own hearts and lives where we may not have even thought of that before. And we ask this in your Son's name. Amen.